Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Tolles. Welcome to this latest live stream. Today we'll be talking about managing ego triggers. For those of you who are new to me, I'm a spiritual teacher. I blog regularly at spiritualawakeningprocess.com, and I do these free talks every other Wednesday, alternating between this 10:30 a.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm always encouraging all of you to make as many as you can so you can ask questions and engage with me here. And of course, if you can't, you can always watch the recording that automatically uploads to my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Jim Tolles. If you search on YouTube or you click the little link down below to my channel, you can find everything that's been recorded in the past there. I think this is a really important topic to get into today because so much of our responses to other people and to life and to ourselves really are just ego triggers, and we're so enmeshed in them that we don't realize that they're deciding everything for us, and we believe that they're what we actually think and feel. So we'll get going into that shortly. If anybody feels like it, feel free to write what country you're in. If you're in a big country, feel free to write what province you're in. I'm here in Nevada in the United States. It's always kind of fun for everyone to see where we are because the internet makes us so international, and I think that's pretty neat. And if you can write this as well as other questions and comments in the chat pod, which is on the right. You have to be signed in to be able to do so. And usually I free flow for 20, 30, or 40 minutes, depending on how things are kind of coming for me. And then I'll get into questions people have. So if I don't answer your question immediately, that's why. I'm just kind of flowing through intuitively, speaking from that space of divine awareness within me, which is part of what this topic is going to take us towards, right? Learning to not speak from ego, to understand what ego is. Welcome, Nissa, from Oregon, USA. Glad you can make it. And also, I apologize if I say anybody's names wrong. Let's get into this topic. And let's start with my definition of what the ego is. I don't pretend to have any official definition, as anyone who knows me understands. I recraft definitions because language is supposed to be a tool. It's not supposed to be a restriction. Too often we get stuck in our words trying to hold on to them as beliefs, and we don't really understand that they're supposed to be serving us. We're not supposed to make them be anything, or we're not supposed to make ourselves conform to those particular ideas. Welcome, Auburn, Washington, Los Angeles. So what is ego? Well, when I talk about ego, what I'm saying is it's a series of beliefs and ideas about who we think we are that's built off of a bunch of unconscious associations, past experiences, other beliefs we absorbed in our upbringing, as well as the base material of the human being, which is the human animal, right? And the human animal has two main things it wants to do. It wants to live, and it wants to help the species to live, right? So that's where we get into the fight or flight mechanisms that drive to survive, as well as, the interest in sex and procreation and protecting children. And that's the animal body. It doesn't think, it has nothing to do with what we think about ourselves in terms of who we think we are, or whether we want kids in the instance of the procreation part. This is just what it's built to do. That's what a sex drive is built to do. So what the fight or flight mechanism is meant to protect us, right? That's what they're doing. And the ego is built off of that. And it's so important to understand this foundation. If we don't understand that, we're really going to get lost. And I see a lot of people get lost in ideas where they're trying to kind of mask this deeper reality, say, oh, I'm not afraid of death. It's like, that's a big statement to say when we have so much of our physiology is built off of this. If you really become free of that fear of death, fear of pain as well, right? Because they're both in there. And sometimes people are less afraid of death than they are of pain, and that leads people to take their lives, which is a great sorrow, of course, because we only get this one life in this body in this way. So being free of those attachments is the big deal. And it's part of the work of the spiritual path to come down to that level eventually, to really see it and acknowledge it, and to learn to unwire that part of us that's still behaving as if we're going to be attacked by a bear. Right? And it has trickled its way up into all sorts of different ego triggers. Like if somebody tells someone else that they look bad, right? And then this fight or flight mechanism is triggered, right? They're upset. But that's basically the fight or flight thing. It's like, I'm going to argue this one, I'm going to fight them or something on some level because I don't agree with what they just said, or I'm going to run from them, or I'm going to avoid them, or some people will just freeze up. Some people check out entirely, right? That's kind of the faint thing. So it's fight, flight, freeze, and I believe faint is part of that. Those are the most basic parts of us. And even though we're putting words around it in different situations and ideas, it's the same mechanisms. So the deepest part of ego triggers are not particularly profound, right? At least the reaction response, but the initial triggers up there seem like, the up there being kind of the level of the mind, seem more complicated. And we like to believe that we're more complicated than we actually are. And I think that's something that's really important, that despite how complicated our ego cells become about this is who I am, this is what I wear, this is how I talk, and this is on and on and on, right? This whole contraption we tend to call ourselves, the basics of it are actually quite simple. But that simplicity is actually profoundly restrictive for us, where we're stuck in it. We don't really know how to get out of that at first. And that's why we do inner work. And it really is the best assumption that when you're starting to do your own inner work and investigating yourself, that you assume every reaction you have is an ego trigger. So when I'm saying trigger, I'm not just saying, we get upset about something. I'm saying it's how we're responding to everything. That somebody smiles at us and there's an unconscious ego trigger that says smile back, or this person is nice, or something else, or there's all sorts of different messages that get said to us rather quickly that we need to start unpacking to understand what we're being told. Because in many regards, the ego is just a general that's passing on orders to the rest of us to say, hey, this is how you act and this is what you do in each of these different situations. And it's always actually interesting when people are stepping outside their ego selves into new situations and they don't have an ego trigger for something, so they don't know what to do. That space of the unknown is actually a great opportunity for growth and for self-discovery if we don't run back to our old ego responses. And so the more fear somebody has of the unknown, right, that'll keep them away from those opportunities. They'll see something that doesn't fit an ego trigger that says, I should like this, I should not like this. They won't know what to do with it. Since they can't categorize it, they choose not to engage with it. And an opportunity there is lost. And you'll also notice, as I said, despite all the ideas and beliefs we can have about ourselves and about life, that the ego is very, very simple because it's operating off that simple animal structure, and it's in the modes of two main things, avoidance and acquiring. It's like, what don't I want and what do I want? And that's what it does for the most part. It's like, oh, I want food. Well, that's useful, right, to eat. But there's all sorts of other things that we say that we want, which may not actually serve us, as well as there's all sorts of different situations that we say we don't want, which may actually serve us. Many of you who are sitting with me today listening to this talk are here because of pain, right? This is one of those things that we want to push away. We don't want that. And yet pain drives most people to take the spiritual path seriously, right? Any sort of deep inner work is usually being driven for most people by some sort of pain, that they're having to do it. And because of it, as some of you who've done some of that inner work have realized, you are better for it. So here we can immediately see a problem with the ego, that it would have pushed away the very pain that would drive it towards something that's actually going to help you in a profoundly important way. And these kinds of decisions go on invisibly for us for most of our life until we do this inner work. And for some people, it will go on their entire life where they actually don't ever make a conscious decision. It was all decided for them. Now, here's the great tricky thing about it, because And this shows up in a lot of interesting ways in society. If you want somebody to think they're free when they're not, you give them some choice, or you give them the illusion that they're making a choice. So let's say you go into an ice cream store, right? And so you walk in and you're allowed three choices. You can choose chocolate, vanilla, or orange sherbet. And because you are given choices in that way, you say, well, okay, I'll go with the orange sherbet today. And you think you made a choice. However, we become so blind that we only see those three choices when this ice cream shop has double dark chocolate mint and pecan praline, and it has gelato, and it has waffle cones, and it has all sorts of different other options that you can't even see because your egos are already discounted them. They've already decided, I don't want these things, these experiences. That's what the ice cream metaphor is, these different experiences. This is not within what I think I should have, or I should want, or I'm good enough to have, or whatever the series of beliefs are. And so you don't see them, but you do believe that you're making a choice and that you made one. Said, I want orange sherbet, so I made a choice, right? Not really. For the most part, people have no idea about these other flavors, and so you have no idea if you made a choice that would serve you best. You just saw that these were the three options. Or we could go with airplane food, right? You get three options. And we just blindly accept that. Not only that, but we accept the store, whatever this particular situation is. Let's call the ice cream store career. And so we just assume that this career, right, and it has only three choices for us. And we can go back to a lot of family programming saying about what you can do. Right, somebody's grown up doing a lot of manual labor, and that's what the family has done. Well, they only see like doing, let's say, HVAC or carpentry or being a developer. Those are their three, and that's what they think they're choosing from, and they think they're choosing. When maybe there's a lot of other careers that would be of interest to them, but it would be outside their comfort zone, outside their ego beliefs about who they are and what they can do. Plenty of people think that they're not smart when they are. And there's plenty of things that education helps with that has really less to do with being smart, but just understanding a different skill set. And we should probably just leave the idea of smarts alone in general, because the ego tends to block out a lot of our intelligence. A lot of people discover all kinds of amazing intelligence inside of them the more they let go of their ego beliefs about what they can and can't do. Some of you will end up doing important core issue work where situations where somebody told you were stupid or dumb, or you got a bad grade at school, which is another way somebody says that you're dumb, right? And you have to heal that part, and you heal that part, then it changes your entire outlook on your own intelligence. And as that drops away, things open up and you see more possible ice cream in the ice cream store. And of course, the ice cream store isn't the only store that we can walk into as far as how we live our lives. And so there's a lot of other different stores, and certain things just get blocked out. And so the ego blocks things out. So whenever you come to a situation and you feel limited, that should be a sign to you that the ego is at work, and that you've already been triggered in a number of different ways to not see other possibilities. In those moments, it's really important to find some third parties outside your normal social circle. See, the other part of the ego that we have to remember is we like to protect our beliefs, and we self-insulate. So by self-insulate, we get other people who have similar beliefs so that we can reflect back the same ideas to each other so that the ego can feel safe. It's like, oh, well, she believes that, my mom believes that, my wife believes that, husband believes that, or whatever the situation is. And so you get this little bubble of beliefs where the egos can multiply reinforce themselves to make themselves feel safe, right? Because that's part of what the animal body wants. The animal body wants to be safe, although the feeling of being safe and the actuality of being safe are different. And I've mentioned that in other blog posts that I've written about. That means it's really important to step outside of it and step into a new community with a different set of ideas and different viewpoints, because then they can reflect back different things to you about yourself. Spiritual community is particularly useful in that regard. Therapists can be good in that regard. Just anyone that's outside. And You don't have to take the first set of opinions, right? You can talk to different types of people in different communities, and you can get different reflections about yourself to help you get a better idea about who you think you are, as well as different opportunities in whatever the situation may be that you feel very limited in. For instance, if you feel very limited in, let's say, romance, whether you're in a relationship now or whether you're not, and if things are starting to feel kind of claustrophobic, and it doesn't feel like it's giving you what you want, then this is an opportunity to ask, well, what am I seeking and why? What do these things give me? For instance, somebody wants to feel listened to. Okay, right? On the surface, it sounds like it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. However, we want to be curious. We want to say, what does it mean to be listened to? What's the impact of that? And a lot of people say, well, it makes me feel good. And it's like, okay, so something just happens here. So there's a feeling attached that you're actually seeking. And there was a belief that wants to see things happen a certain way before you can have that feeling. So that in and of itself is an ego trigger. Somebody listens to you and you feel good. It's like, okay, we got to investigate this. Why do I need another person to behave a certain way for me to have this other feeling? And so there's a lot of interesting elements in this web. A lot of times what we're going to find out is this need to feel heard is because somebody has felt unheard or invalidated, or they have self-worth issues, and that will take you back into your inner work, usually in childhood, to some of the key moments where you felt that you weren't heard, to just kind of a building up of that feeling invalidated feeling, because sometimes things just build up incrementally, and it's not like one big moment or big experience. Some experiences happen before our memory was fully formed, and so those things are just entirely emotional, just a sense that you're not heard or you're invalidated. One of the things about ego triggers is they're going to send you away to kind of fix things. Or, as I said, that's another kind of acquiring or avoiding things that feel bad and defending yourself against something that might happen that feels bad. On the spiritual path, we learn to turn towards it. We start to say, okay, this feeling is mine and the ideas are mine. Where are they coming from? Why are they coming up? Why are they coming up to make me feel bad? Right? Because you don't need to feel unheard. That's a feeling. And the sense that I am unheard, right? That's the belief that we attach to the feeling. How true it is something we should also question. What we usually don't do is we don't question that part. We just assume, well, I feel unheard. And that's a problem, because if you accept that this is where you are, then you're not going to investigate it. And everything becomes about numbing it and avoiding situations where you'll feel more unheard or more invalidated. And this is the state of a lot of humanity. They're just completely lost in their ego triggers. They accept they feel unheard, or they feel poorly about themselves. And then they try to hide it with pride, or with drugs, or with sex, or with work, or with awards. And right, we know this. You all know this. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. But we have to get better at noticing this in ourselves. If you don't get better at noticing this within yourself, you will keep acting out all kinds of ego triggers. And let's be clear, our ego can be shifty, because we don't really want to go into pain, right? That's part of this aversion thing that we have in the ego. It's like, well, if it's painful, it's bad. That's just kind of the default belief that we have inside ourselves. It's like, if it hurts, I don't want to do it. And some people get into the no pain, no gain attitude, but that's not right either. Because we're not trying to pound ourselves. We're just trying to go towards things that are already uncomfortable and be able to consciously deal with it. To say, hey, what's going on inside that's feeling invalidated? I'm going to sit with this feeling. I'm going to observe this feeling. I'm going to open to this feeling and let it really talk to me. And that's a fundamentally different idea than what most of humanity is trying to do. And the sneaky part I was just alluding to, the sneaky part, especially in the spiritual path, is where somebody says, oh, I need a soulmate. I need a purpose. I need, right, it starts to think in terms of how can I self-medicate with a spiritual path rather than how can I go through the pain of healing. this is a really big change in perspective. And it's a one that many of you probably need to make this change. Because I get so many people who are emailing me and they're saying, they want this, they want that. But what they're still trying to do is they're trying to self-medicate these unconscious beliefs, and they're trying to barter with the ego and to say, okay, I'll keep you around. We'll just redecorate the prison cell. And plenty of people only go part way, where it's like, okay, so I go into the ice cream store and now I see 6 ice cream. That's better, right? I can see 6. And it's like there are like an infinite number of ice cream cones in this place, right? You can have so many different kinds. 6 is not that big of an improvement. But this is the way like the ego kind of doesn't want to really deal with the nitty gritty and the disgusting pain that can sit inside a human body. Those of you who have had awakenings where that sort of purging starts to happen and you feel like you're being squeezed and burned up and all that sort of stuff, understand how much pain we can store. And I don't think we're completely unconscious to that fact. I think that's part of the reason most people don't want to do this work. I think a part of you knows. I think before my awakening, a part of me knew, and it was like scared stupid. It's like, this is going to be intense. And since that triggers this deep ego belief in that animal body of like pain is bad, because that's just how the animal body thinks. Pain is bad. Pain means you need to change something. On the purely physiological level, pain is a useful communication tool. It's just been translated into all sorts of psychological and emotional garbage that doesn't make sense. So making your body feel safe when you're about to be attacked by a bear makes a little bit more sense, right? Because you need the adrenaline and the stuff to get yourself able to defend yourself. That being said, the fact that we can think about how to deal with a bear is actually more important now. Because if you run from the bear, the thing's going to chase you. If you can think about it and remember what the sign said at the trailhead, which is to make yourself sound loud, make noise, and look bigger than you are, right? That's you using your brain, and you're actually keeping yourself safe. But anyway, going back to the general idea of pain in the body is to help us be able to protect ourselves. There's a lot of ways where that's moving into things where, like, whether somebody insults our work or, yells at us in traffic, right? Where we're having the same mechanism ramp itself up into the fight or flight that has no use to us there. It doesn't help us. It doesn't help us to think or to logically deal with it. So as I said at the beginning, when we deal with the ego, we're going to go back down to the basics. And the foundation of our unconscious ego is the animal body and all the instinctual things that it's trying to do. And all that stuff, right? Those deep roots look different than the flowers, if you catch my meaning here, that when we get down here, the ego is really just kind of flower and leaves up here. That's what we're looking at. That's what it grew out of, all these deep hidden roots. They're very different looking things, but the roots are what's important. And what also happens on the spiritual path is because following these triggers down to find these deeper core issues isn't fun. People create spiritual egos, right? This is where they leave their job and they leave their partner or whatever, and then they take on a spiritual name and they find some soulmate or someone that they call as a soulmate or whatever, and they find a purpose, and they just hide the ego's insecurities again. To really do this sort of inner work, you let go of insecurities and you actually kind of forget about them. Like, there are plenty of issues that I can't remember that I had. Right? Some of them have just left so deeply that they're just not there. And that's a beautiful thing. For the ego self that wants to have an awards session of saying, well, I left this issue and I left this issue and left this issue, that becomes more and more impossible because you're letting go of the ego itself, which means you're letting go of the very mechanism of remembering what's been let go. There's no need to remember it. The freedom in and of itself is enough of a reward. You don't need to really remember it for yourself or to tell others. The only time I really remember it for myself is when I'm talking to you as kind of inspiration to encourage you further. That's the function of it, not for me to get any sort of accolades. Going back, 2 main forms of ego triggers that everything's going to basically fall under is like avoidance and acquiring. If we see something that we think we want, our ego says, I want that. That's an ego trigger. Whether it actually is ice cream or sex or money or a calm day at the beach, whatever it is, That's your ego telling you how to think. And when it's telling you how to think, it's time to slow down and to be more curious. Just about everything the ego is going to tell you comes from the past. It's come from past associations, past situations. It's not in the present moment. It may talk to you in the present moment, but it's not in the present moment. All of its assumptions about what's going on. As we learn to understand that, we can start to break free and focus more on the present moment and focus on what intuitively comes up. I can give you a very silly and simple example. I went out to this local restaurant that I like to go to last night, and I had it in my head, a past association that I wanted to get this one particular meal. And when I got there, that didn't feel right anymore. Intuitively, it felt like I would try the special, and I did, and it was great, right? But that was a change, and it came in the moment. It didn't come from me remembering, oh, I like this other thing, and I actually tried something I'd never had before, and I really like that. And while it's not always going to be that way, that the changes we make we're going to immediately like or like at all, the point is like the freshness of that moment, that when you listen to yourselves and really allow yourself to open further, you can hear more things. Whenever anything somebody says upsets you, that's a huge sign that it's an ego trigger. If somebody says your name wrong, for example, and something gets upset, you're not in any way harmed, right? There's no actual danger. Somebody just misuttered a bunch of syllables out of their voice box. So who is getting upset? Well, it's the ego. Why is the ego getting upset? Investigate. Right? That's just such an important thing. And the first step in all this too is really kind of the stepping back. Breathe and relax and neutralize your response. Whether it's this desire for something or this aversion to something else, come back to that space of neutrality and just breathe and relax. Notice that you're having a response. That's so key in managing an ego trigger. If you do not neutralize, you're just going to go back into it. And a lot of you will notice that the tendency will be to continue to keep going back into it because we're just so used to it. And being in openness and neutrality feels uncomfortable to the ego self. It starts to illuminate something that doesn't want to be seen. The ego, in many regards, is kind of a puppet master, but it's also being controlled, as I said, by our animal body, which is just trying to get us safe, keep us safe for the most part, as well as some of the other things I mentioned earlier. So step number 1, notice when you're having basically any sort of reaction. Step number 2, breathe, relax. Step number 3, start to neutralize by not doing anything at first. Most situations don't require an immediate response, so don't make an immediate response. Right now, most people's immediate responses are just going to come from the ego. That's just what's going to happen because that's what you know. And we have to create more and more space to get any sort of sense of what is actually going on inside us in the present moment rather than what we're projecting onto it. Because that's part of the trap of it too. And this is why we have to be dedicated to inner work, because not only are we reacting to things, we're also projecting onto things. We're projecting our ideas and beliefs onto other people and other situations about what they are, when we may be completely wrong about that. And that's a humbling thing. And there's a lot of humility that's needed to do this work. To start to realize, I don't know who I am. I grew up in this car and I started driving this car, this body, this being, and I never really asked where any of this was coming from. So I see some comments going on over there, and I'm going to get to them in a couple minutes, still kind of in the middle of the free flow. So we have to question these types of things, to start to explore them and to just watch them at first, to neutralize them, let them just be there. As many of you know, I recommend journaling. And so the journal is a way to get things out of your head. So along with noticing the trigger, write about the situation that was going on so that you can get a sense of, okay, what was I looking at? And spend a little bit of time just kind of considering, was I actually looking at this right? For example, somebody at work criticizes your work. And then the fight or flight mechanism kicks in and somebody starts to think that they're terrible and they're doing a horrible job or whatnot. Are they seeing the situation properly? They probably aren't. First off, the person may consider that the other person is critiquing them, is being mean. Maybe they are. Some people are, but others aren't. Others are actually offering constructive feedback. Others are terrible at offering things in a socially comfortable way. But that doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they're not as socially adept as others. And that's kind of a skill set in and of itself. And then there's the reaction the person has of think they're doing bad or doing badly in their job. So they may be completely misreading a situation. Another reading of the situation, depending on how things are, if the reality could be the person is actually trying to help them. Maybe they see that the other person's been struggling, wants to offer the critique as a way to help them so that they do better, so that they keep their job, if their job cut's coming up. Maybe it's just general offering of improvement, and they're not doing a bad job at all. That's a misperception. So these are things that people need to explore in those situations, and to have a certain level of vulnerability in doing so and asking other people, for their feedback. And that can be a big challenge because of how much we are stuck in the self-protect mode, particularly with work, because of all the triggers that brings up around finances and scarcity and not having resources and so on and so forth. So there's a questioning level that is important, questioning for yourself and questioning for the situation around you and learning to be inquisitive rather than defensive. And that's a really different form of engagement. And I think that really starts us down the path towards greater levels of consciousness, because now you're curious, you're engaged with what's happening. You're not just kind of a victim to what your ego thinks is happening. Right? And this has effects in all parts of society. Every now and then I like to use Vietnam as an example of two projections that didn't understand what was the reality. The Vietnamese were seeking to become free and to get rid of the colonial power of the French at the time. And the U.S. was projecting onto them that they just wanted to be a bunch of communists and were going to do something bad to the U.S. somehow, right? And this is a very tiny country. But the hysteria of the time, the fear and the ego projections of the time, and I'm sure that the Vietnamese might not have fully understood what the U.S. was actually concerned about. They just saw another colonial power who wants to expand their empire, right? And so between those two big sets of ego triggers, like millions of lives were lost. And when I say millions, most of those were Vietnamese. Some horrible number of Vietnamese people were killed in that war. As well as, there's no good number of people killed in war, right? But just comparatively, I think it's somewhere around 3 million. Don't quote me on that. I encourage you to research on it. I think this is an important topic in general to know your history. And it's like 56,000, 60 to 60,000 U.S. soldiers were killed in Vietnam. So that's horrible all the way around. And it's coming from the ego. It's coming from projections, and it's coming from fear triggers. And there we go. This is what emanates out when individuals don't do their work. It emanates out into greater cultural problems that can go on like this and cause all sorts of pain. And, these things are going on today. So I can only encourage you that this has huge ramifications. In the microcosm of the family, the more parents wake up and the more they do their inner work so that they can see their kids clearly, they can see their partners clearly, that is huge. It's going to give their children such a leg up on life to consider themselves in a completely different way, rather than just think that they're stuck in being this being the way that they are, however they grow up, and that they just have to live by those rules of their own making. They can start to see that they create those rules and they can change them. And I think that's kind of the big step forward, as you start to pay attention and you notice these triggers and you first neutralize it, you're already on the path to changing them. Right? Instead of getting upset when somebody critiques you at work, you take a few deep breaths. You're like, oh, okay. There's critique, and I'm having a response. So you just be with that response. You don't have to do anything. And then the longer you can kind of sit with it, and that can get uncomfortable. Right? There can be a little bit of a churn that starts to go on with the ego. It's like, I got to say something, I got to do something. I don't like this. I want to get away from it. The more you can be with that inner discomfort, the more things will start to break down internally. And then a response kind of wants to come up on its own. It comes up more intuitively. And maybe in the issue of critique that I'm talking about here at the work situation, what comes up is thank you. I hadn't thought of that, right? That you've gotten out of the fight or flight mode of the animal body and the ego has calmed itself down enough, right? That it's no longer worried about, oh, I'm going to get fired, I'm doing a terrible job, right? All that stuff gets calmed down. Suddenly you can hear what was actually being said, which was useful critique. You can use it and apply it, and you enjoy life better. You have better connection with this other person in your office. Your work improves, right? This is just one situation of all the amazing benefits that can come out of neutralizing some of these triggers. And we can paint this picture across every relationship, every situation, that there are often hidden opportunities that you are never going to be able to see, nor are you going to be able to evolve with them and to cultivate them when we're stuck in an ego trigger. So I think these are some initial thoughts, and I see some questions and comments over here that I'll get into. For anyone who's just joining, I'm Jim Tolles. I'm a spiritual teacher here talking about ego triggers and how to deal with them. And if anyone wants to support this work, because this is fully supported by donations, there's a donation link down below. And I appreciate any financial support you offer. So let's see what's being said from this. I have suspected at moments intelligence is less of a blessing and more of a curse. It seems the intelligence gave ego more tools to delude oneself. Well, I don't really call this intelligence of the ego. The ego isn't very intelligent. There is a deeper intelligence within you, and that's what I'm pointing you towards, that in that space of awareness. That actually is exceptionally intelligent. In fact, you really do get sharper and better at thinking about things the more you let go of the ego, because the ego is saying, I can only think about something in one way, when there's an infinite number of ways we can think about it. And the more we can kind of relax and be open, then you start to say, oh, wow, look at this and this opportunity. Just like I was saying with the being critiqued at work. When the person goes into that trigger and they can't hear the critique, they are making themselves stupid, right? Because they can't engage with what's actually happening. But when they can neutralize that, their own intelligence comes forward, and then they can start to realize, oh, this is what this person's saying. This person's actually helping me. Maybe they said it poorly, but they're trying to help me, and you can engage with it. They can be grateful for that, right? And so that encourages the person to continue helping them. And who doesn't need a lot of help in life, right? We're all an interconnected society. We're all supporting each other all the time. That's an important thing to appreciate. Doing anything on our own is extremely hard. Like if we want to live in a shack by ourselves, no electricity, no water, no human made products of any other kind, we have to make everything ourselves. That's a tough life. So we're very interconnected, and learning to appreciate that interconnection and appreciate the ways others support us is important. So that's a situation, that particular example, is where this person actually becomes more intelligent. They learn because they're now willing to listen to the critique. They learn how to neutralize the ego self. They're breaking down the pattern of self-hatred that's I'm illuminating in that particular situation. Lots of things happen. There was a follow-up from Brian. I don't think intelligence is fundamentally bad, but it can be a hindrance to truth when the ego tries to identify with that intelligence. Yeah, I would agree with that. Brian also says, what do you suggest for encountering triggers that happen at a very subtle, rapid, and energetic level? As soon as I touch upon a trigger, it opens up a Pandora's box of a million issues and feelings. Well, I think, first off, I honor you that you can notice that it's opening up a Pandora's box, because that means you've got a little bit of space. That means you got a little bit of room to work with here. When everything happens so rapidly, we don't even realize we've reacted. That's when we're completely lost. And we can't have these conversations, because the retort somebody would say to me if they're in that space is, well, this is just how I feel, right? Or this is who I am. Anybody who says it like that, they have no idea who they are. And there's no real room to work. And unless it's a near and present danger, you just have to leave people in that space. Near and present danger is somebody's going to harm themselves right now, or they're going to harm somebody else. But those are usually the times when we kind of extend ourselves, or we seek help, or we intervene in some way. But most of the times people aren't in a near and present danger. They're probably not doing something particularly great for themselves or others, but they have to be allowed to have their own choice. But in general, noticing the rapidness means you now have time to breathe and relax into it, where you can just be like, okay, I'm going to notice that there's this rapid response. And by breathing and relaxing, you're now starting to send a very different message to your body. It's not going to be comfortable. because all the old systems are going to go into play. They say, all right, let's start her up, the assembly line of fear chemicals or whatever the situation. It could be desire, right? Where you see someone's like, oh, I have to be with this person and I got to have them, right? It's all this desire comes up, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and we have to want to be willing to endure it to a certain degree. Be like, okay, I'm going to be with this discomfort, right? This is part of breaking down an old pattern. So that's kind of the suggestion is neutralize and have a willingness to be with the discomfort. And the longer you can stay there, the more you can observe and continue with the line of intelligence. The smarter you get about yourself. You get better at identifying these different little triggers, these different sensations that are going on in the body, the emotions. And as you go, you get better at kind of drawing out the beliefs that are trying to hide down there and I'm trying to make you do something. And in general, going back to the acquiring and aversion, getting and not wanting, break it down like that with any situation. See, what is it I'm trying to get, or what am I trying to avoid or not have happen? And I think that will help you go further in understanding what ego issues are involved. Because to be fair, I mean, there's some triggers have multiple things, and those are the most powerful ones for us. When there's only like one belief or one issue, they're not necessarily as strong. So thanks for the questions and comments. Nissa said, thank you, Brian. Well said. I am probably the infant in the room. I am transitioning from viewing my ego as the enemy to more of a compass point to what needs to be seen and released. Yeah, and I would say this is the part of that stepping back. When you step back, that's where we go for being able to see and for wisdom to develop, that we can kind of see the ego as just a survival mechanism. So it's not bad. Usually what I make a distinction between the unconscious ego, which is the thing that doesn't know itself. It doesn't know what it has, the beliefs, the experiences that make it up, really. It doesn't really understand how it's projecting. It just doesn't understand. The unconsciousness is like darkness. And a conscious ego is kind of what we create with the self-work, right? It's an ego that knows it doesn't really exist. We don't have to keep it. It can change as a situation needs to change, versus the unconscious ego tends to not have any ability to change. And we can put it down because ultimately it is an illusion and we don't need to hold on to it. So we can use it when it's useful and we can put it away when it's not. It's like sometimes it is helpful to have that conscious ego. For me, it goes back and says, well, what foods do I like when I go out to order? We'll go back to the restaurant metaphor. Right? Sometimes it's helpful. It's like, okay, I'll go with the usual thing that I get. It's not bad, right? It's not getting in the way, but I'm no longer stuck in it. Like, the person who has to go out and eat the same thing over and over, right? They're stuck in the unconscious ego. Well, it's just what I like. It's like you haven't tried anything else. You don't know. And sometimes, the thing that you liked and all those other times you get it and it doesn't taste as good. Maybe it's you. Maybe they didn't make it the same way, right? So that shows that life is always changing. And a conscious ego embraces that life is always changing, as well as the fact that it's only a temporary tool and we don't have to hold on to it. Thanks for the questions. I got another one here. And for anybody who hasn't asked questions, you feel free to do so. We're just talking about ego stuff. And please, keep the crosstalk to a minimum. Keep the questions pointed at me because it's such a small space and I don't want to miss people's questions. SJ Gregory, I don't know if you meant to put a question in, but all I see is an I. And Brian's following up. Thanks, Jim. Is there one root cause that's covering up this Pandora's box of issues? Or is it just energy freeing itself? I think I need a little bit more explanation of what you mean. Because, energy freeing itself, that's one thing. That's something else. Being triggered is something else entirely. Certainly energy moving hits triggers, but most people aren't really going through that sort of experience unless they have an awakening or they're doing a lot of energetic work, maybe Kundalini yoga or intense breath work like holotropic breathing or some of the tantra sexual practices that are meant to move energy. As far as ultimate root causes, when we get back to the safety thing, that individual survival in the animal body that the ego is built on, as well as the sex drive and the drive to protect children. Right? Those are kind of our big root causes that you're just going to end up back there, but you can't jump ahead in your work. Right? You can't jump to those conclusions intellectually, because to really work with those base ones is to work actually more with the body itself in the way it functions and feels and expresses itself. So as the mind kind of clears out, it gets easier to deal with the heart levels and emotional levels that are stickier and move more slowly. The mind always kind of moves the quickest in my experience. And then the body, of course, moves the slowest. And so like if you're getting into shape and you're working out and such things like that, right? You can't just think your way there. You can't think your way to being a better dancer, right? You can conceptually know it, and that's helpful. But you picked up the conceptual idea of how to dance in the steps really quickly. You watched a couple videos, but you're dancing over and over and over again for the body. And so getting to the root issues at the body level takes time. The follow-up from Brian as well, I discovered that the root trigger is of all this energy. Once again, energy, I'm still not sure about the question here, but energy illuminates. So think of energy more like light in some regards. It illuminates what's already in the room. Triggers tend to be linked back to beliefs and to old pain. So a lot of what we try to do is we try to avoid past situations that hurt us. And some of them we remember, some of them we forget. But the old avoidance techniques and things like that stay built up. And so another way you can see a trigger is like the ego is raising an alarm like, hey, you're about to get hurt. Or as I said, it could be the desire side. It's like, hey, we're about to get something we want. And that can also be built up of old experiences and things like that. So those are the more... The deeper parts and the deeper roots we're kind of working with as far as like our human experiences that build up on top of those animal instinctual aspects of ourselves. And Brian says, I think my mind really just wants the discomfort to end and it tends to jump ahead a lot, like you said. That's perfectly human. You just have to be more resilient than your mind, right? Your mind is untrained. So sometimes I make a distinction between like awareness, which ultimately is all of us, but yeah, I often combine awareness and energy or presence. The mind and the ego to me are different, right? The ego usually uses only small parts of our brain. That's another thing that I've noticed. Like the more you let go of the ego, the more you can think and you can expand your way of thinking and realizing and seeing. It's very powerful. So the mind gets retrained, and that's why meditation is useful. The journaling is part of, being able to see how the ego is used to thinking, and that's using your mind a little bit more to say like, oh, these are the patterns. That's what you look for when you journal. It's not so much about complaining about life. That doesn't help. Lots of people kind of bitch in their journals, and that's not taking them anywhere. It's just reinforcing things. It's about saying, okay, let's look at this and question it. Where is this coming from? Why am I upset? What is the trigger here? What's going on? And so that sort of inquisitiveness is actually very useful for the mind, and it will make you much smarter about yourself. And yeah, you have to get comfortable with discomfort on this path, to sit with these sort of emotional, psychological things when there's nothing actually wrong. and I wrote a blog post called Focusing on Reality. You may want to search on that after this. And you just go to spiritualawakeningprocess.com, search on Focusing on Reality, and you can find it. Because when we focus on reality, most times we find out there's nothing actually wrong. And so that helps us to show the absurdity of the discomfort that's coming up. Doesn't make it necessarily as easy as we'd like it to be, but it can offer just a little bit of ease to understand that this is just something that needs to come up, and you breathe and relax. Hello, Susanna. I find it hard to slow down. There's an immense excitement and desire to explore and throw myself into life. Is there a point at which life is just about living and engaging, not dwelling on yourself? I feel like I'm learning through trying things out, but things can quickly change, which can be quite disoriented. Well, you want something. Whether it's the excitement, that's part of what you want. So this is now the ego acquire mode. That's up for you to kind of to explore, and you have to slow down if you want to really explore it, right? The moving fast is kind of a flight mechanism. When we say fight or flight, it doesn't necessarily always mean we're feeling badly about a situation. So excitement, people go to games and things like that, and there's a lot of excitement, right? And so it's a kind of fear that people are kind of enjoying too, that they're enjoying not knowing who's going to win, but they're hoping that their team's going to win. And so that sort of is another kind of addiction a lot of people have. So I would say, Susanna, don't look for a point of where life just becomes something different. You keep inquiring within. It's like, what are you trying to get? What is this excitement? Where are you trying to go? And those questions, I think, can be very powerful for you. Next question from Greta. I discovered that below all triggers is the fear of death pain. Do you mean this, Brian? So she's asking you, Brian. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely reflect what Greta just said. Right, that to me is part of those fundamentals. It's like we want to survive, that's the animal body, and we want to continue the species. And by we, I mean our animal body. Has nothing to do with whether you want kids or not. And that sits down there. So like on the parent side, like for my parent students, they may notice at times they have just this irrational urge to protect their kid if their kid isn't allowed to play at the soccer practice today, right? The coach doesn't put him in, right? That sort of irrationality to it where it has no real need to be there, and the intensity of it, that's an instinctual body response. That's the animal body. So that's just something to appreciate. It's a powerful mechanism, and it's kept the species alive. That's why it's still there. I imagine other species, if there was another form of human being that didn't have a strong sense of needing to live, just kind of, got eaten by saber-toothed tigers and didn't exist anymore. I don't know, right? But because we had a strong enough drive to keep alive and to procreate and to protect the young so that species could continue, here we are. So it has had an important function. I think that's an important thing as we're coming towards the last 10 minutes. And if you haven't asked a question, please do so if you want to. Appreciate that these are functional. They now may be dysfunctional, but there are functions they're trying to serve. So that's another way to manage your ego triggers, is to start to notice when fear or desire or any of these things kind of come up for you, sadness, happiness, right? So what is the function here? Why is this being chosen? What's it trying to do? Brian says, great, I think you're right. I've encountered that fear intellectually, but I've not reached its root at a deep primal level. Yeah, that's a long path for most of us, Brian. This is a big deal to deal with a primal level. And Suzanne says, I think you may be right. Thank you. You're welcome. From SJ, Gregory, does meditation help? Personally, for meditating, I have more awareness of my ego triggers. At one level, yet I find myself intensely feeling the pain and still believing the self-limiting stories. Yes, meditation helps because that's part of that practice of relaxing and separating yourself and creating. Separation isn't exactly the right word, but it gives you that sense of separation between you and the ego self. As the ego goes away, it doesn't feel like you're separate from anything. It just feels like there's more space. So in and of itself, the ego creates a sense of separation. Any of you who've had the experience where like your mind is really quiet, you'll notice you don't really feel separate when you're just kind of in the observer. You just feel spacious and open. But when the ego's there, suddenly it feels like separation. It feels like there's the observer, and then there's this thing that's being observed, the ego. But the fact that, you're feeling the pain and you're still believing, well, feeling the pain is part of that kind of breaking down process that we go through. Why you are still attached to believing the self-limiting stories, though, is part of your work. Is to be curious, to say, okay, why am I still believing this stuff? What do I think these stories are going to get me? How are they going to protect me or avoid a situation or get me the things that I want? And I think those are just kind of the next steps. And as you're observing, you can journal about them. And going back to this, what is the function of these stories? What are they trying to do? And I don't mean jumping to the conclusion, that they're not helping me. Yes, we know that. But on some level, and some of us can be very rudimentary, a lot of our ultimate beliefs are really coming out of our early years of childhood. So they may not even necessarily be a fully formed belief. It's just kind of a thought feeling thing of like, I am not okay, right? And so a lot of things grow out of that seed, that I am not okay seed. But yes, meditation definitely helps. I recommend it to everyone. And in general, there are a lot of interesting studies saying that meditation helps with people's overall mental health and does all sorts of good things for our brains. So you can also just think of that as hygiene. Think of meditation as brain hygiene. Wash your brain. From this, I have found allowing the pain to rise and sitting with it in my heart allows the release. Shying away from the pain stuffs it back down from where it arose. I have found you can even cling to the pain, which will not allow it to be released. Absolutely. You just keep surrendering. You breathe, relax, release. Breathe, relax, surrender. And embrace it as long as it needs to be embraced. Be with the pain, don't avoid it. You can't anyway. So we got a couple minutes left. If anyone hasn't asked a question or comment, feel free to do so. As I said earlier, I'm fully supported by donations. So if you feel like supporting me, I appreciate it. There's a donation link down below in the info section. The next talk I'm going to talk about when to intensify a spiritual awakening, because there are definite times when that's important. Intensification of a spiritual awakening is really coming after a deeper understanding of how much that energy and that transformation is helping you. Usually doesn't come before because there's not enough buy-in from the person. And the people who might do it too early are just trying to get through it and get it over. So I'll talk about that and a number of other topics around what it means to intensify, how you do it, how you do it consciously. And that'll be in 2 weeks at 6 p.m. Pacific time. I'll announce it on the blog. If you're not on my newsletter, there's also a newsletter for what I call the Wake Up Call newsletter. And I announce these free talks there as well. So just some more things. And of course, I do one-on-one sessions. If we've never talked before about one-on-one sessions, you're welcome to email me. All of this is really leading up towards spiritual freedom. I mean, that's ultimately what I'm teaching. I'm teaching you to be free of these mechanisms so that you can actually choose, you can see life as it is, life in its reality, and to engage with that. When we're too stuck in our triggers, we're also usually, as I said earlier, stuck in our projections. So our projections allow us to not see much of life or parts of life, and that allows us to make poor assumptions about it, and that generally triggers the ego. And as I said, on the macro level, this leads to wars. It leads to domestic violence in families. It leads to all sorts of pain and suffering. The path of spiritual freedom is letting go of the ego. It's letting go of suffering. It's not letting go of pain. And so many of you will feel a lot of pain at different times, but that's part of life. That's not actually an issue. Sometimes these pains break down. Other times they're just things you have to live with. Like I have a strain in my low back today. It's a pain I have to live with. Doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. It's just something the body did. It's part of life, part of being in a human body. But I don't have to be upset about my low back pain, right? See, that's the suffering. That's the ego self. And it's truly extraordinary. The more you let go, the more you want to keep letting go. Because you see more of life, you see opportunities. We can go back to the ice cream store metaphor, where suddenly, wow, look at all of these flavors. There's like hundreds of flavors in there. Flavors I couldn't even have imagined. Couldn't even imagine. Why? Because the ego isn't imaginative. The ego just knows what it knows. And slowing down helps us to start to open those doors, to start to pay more attention to something. Don't assume that you know what anything is. Right? Go more slowly and investigate it. And at times, there'll be things where people are like, well, that's not what I meant, or that's what I said, or that's what's going on. That can be a time to be curious, to say, okay, doesn't mean that they're not full of projections. It just is an opportunity to be curious and to investigate, because through curiosity, we can learn more. And so it says, thank you so much, Jim, for being willing and available. Thank you for doing your work, which allows you to support others. You're welcome. It's an honor to serve. And it's what arises naturally. Susanna seconds it. Thank you. And I think that's kind of a last point, because I didn't really have time to get into freedom. I have other things, and I'm going to have a blog come up on the website pretty soon about how to find spiritual freedom, where I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But I don't really work because I have to. I work because that's just what kind of wants to come out of me. There's this natural quality, and it's such a beautiful thing. And this natural quality is in all of you, of how you want to engage with life. Some of you may want to serve us the way that I do, but others don't have to. It's not necessary. It's not about becoming a spiritual person, right? This sort of idea of what spirituality is. It's just about being. So there's no idea wrapped around it. And the ease of that, and the flow of that, and the kindness of it, the wisdom of it, the humility, all these things that just kind of arise out of people when they allow themselves to just be in that space, is phenomenal. And it opens whole other doors to deeper and more amazing kinds of evolution and growth than any of you can imagine. Unless, of course, you happen to be in that space, and then you know what I'm talking about. So those are my thoughts for today. Thank you all for your kind questions. I hope this has been supportive. And I hope you can join me again in 2 weeks, or if this is the time that works for you, 4 weeks from now. I haven't decided what that talk's going to be about, but you're welcome to email me with talk suggestions if you like. Lots of love, everybody. Have a beautiful rest of your day, your morning, wherever you may be. Bye.